Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Andrew McCormick. So Tim and I have been doing this podcast for almost a full year now, which is pretty crazy that we're approaching that milestone. And, by the way, thank you to all the listeners out there supporting us. We've noticed that some of the biggest buzz that we get is when we dig into some of those more specific topics, especially curriculum type episodes. We realize that while we can, Tim and I sometimes wax philosophic about the nature of education, people still need and want thoughts on just how to make all this crazy awesomeness work. How do we teach the National Core Art Standards with a huge class size and a kind of junky budget? Seriously, if anyone knows how to do that, let me know. So we're going to start today a two-part look at curriculum and how art teachers design and pace our curriculum. Today, I'm really happy to bring on AOE's very own Johanna Russell.
I teach at Northwest Elementary School in Ankeny, Iowa, and this is my take on art elementary curriculum, where the focus is not on what you are teaching, but what students are able to take away.
Now, this is going to be sort of a unique talk on curriculum development. If you're looking for a talk that's going to tell you exactly when you should run your fourth grade landscape painting project or your second grade weaving project, this really isn't that type of talk. So instead, Johanna and I are going to dig into sort of a Zen way of no way path of dealing with curriculum. I know Johanna well enough to know that she's not a big fan of being told that everyone should be doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. And I'm not a fan of that either. With curriculum development, instead, I think it's a question that we ask ourselves, what do we really want our students to learn? And then from there, we kind of start working backwards, and then we think of the best way to get our kids to that point. Now, for some of us, this is going to be kind of a tab or choice route. And for others, maybe the big piece is going to be wrestling with and then fleshing out the National Core Art Standards. Or maybe there's people out there who have the ability in ourselves to link all of this stuff together, the skills we want them to learn, giving them choices, a mindset we want them to adopt, using the standards, and also creating great assessments. Now, I don't think it's going to be easy to tie all of that stuff together. And I really think that it's up to each teacher to figure out how to do that on her own, or it kind of comes across as unauthentic. I mean, who hasn't taught a lesson that we've seen out there on social media or Pinterest just to see that sucker die flat on its face? But I do think that tying all that stuff together, the skills, the mindsets, the standards, the assessments, it's totally possible. I think we just need to keep in mind that curriculum is way less what we teach, and it's way more how we teach. While this whole episode is focused on curriculum design, Johanna and I get pretty deep into tab and all the practicals in and outs of running a tab room. So for those listeners out there that are kind of wondering about how to pull off a tab classroom, or maybe just ways to offer up more choice and student-directed lessons, I want to recommend that you guys check out AOE's course, Choice-Based Art Education. Now, I've taught choice-based before, and I know that students always get a bunch of great tools and tricks to think about adding choice to their normal repertoire. Choice-based is a 3-credit course, and it begins at the first of every month. So head on over to theartofed.com and check out this course and all the other great classes under the courses tab. I can't wait to get into this interview with Johanna, but I also want to mention you all need to hang around and make sure that you listen to the very end of this podcast, as Tim and I have kind of an exciting offer for all the Art Ed Radio listeners out there. But now let's buckle in and open our minds to the great Johanna Russell and all the creative ways that she thinks about curriculum. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this talk. Okay, Johanna, thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Absolutely. I'm excited to chat.
So, I've always really enjoyed kind of seeing what you're up to, because I've always thought of you as like my sister in arms, as being a fellow zany, wacky middle school teacher. There must be something wrong with us, a screw loose or something. But recently, you just transitioned to teaching elementary school for the first time ever. So I'm kind of wondering how that's going and how that's treating you.
Yeah, I loved middle school, but I wanted to see if I could take the systems and routines that I had at the middle school level, and could I get that to work in an elementary setting where the students, have some similarities, but on the other hand, provide a whole new set of unique challenges. It was funny the other day. I had a kindergarten student, and it lasted like 15 minutes. I could not get him to understand that putting his clay project in the kiln was not the same as killing his clay project.
Yeah, it's a whole different set of issues that we have to grapple with when we're elementary teachers and then middle school teachers. And I did that many, many years ago, so I'm kind of having flashbacks to some of the bizarre conversations that you'll get into as an elementary teacher. But, we get into bizarre conversations as middle school teachers as well. And, sometimes it's not so different, their needs and their abilities, middle school kids to elementary school kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, hey, I know this is your first year of doing elementary, but one of the things I'm really impressed about, because I stumbled across some of your videos recently, was that you are jumping right into it with tab. And I know you've been doing tab, for a little bit, but the thing with tab that always strikes me as kind of interesting is, secondary people will say, well, I can never do that. Only elementary people can do that. And I hear elementary people say, I can't do that. Only secondary people could do that. And you're like really pulling it off, and you've pulled it off now at 2 different levels. So I know this is a big setup, but I kind of want you to talk about, why do you do tab? What do you get out of it? And then how do you do it? Like, how do you pull that off with like kindergartners and first grade? Because I'm really impressed by that.
I think the first thing to realize is I did a lot of reading and a lot of research. Also, I did have that experience of doing this at the middle school/high school level. So I think that allowed me to hit the ball or ground rolling just a little bit faster. But one of the biggest things I did is I read this book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And essentially there's a huge core part of our brain that keeps and records habits. And at the elementary level, it's almost easier to do tab because that hasn't been founded yet. I mean, for those kindergartners, I am their first art teacher experience. And so I get to build those habits starting day one. And so I have a consistent routine to my day every single day with every single class, even though it is in a tab structure. I mean, minute 12 of every class is exactly the same, but what they're experiencing and what they choose to do during those minutes is completely unique to the student. And that's the biggest key to making it work.
I like thinking about it that way. It hadn't dawned on me before. What I like so much about some of your videos, and we'll get into those in a second, is it does seem both simultaneously loose and that there is freedom, but then also tight. And I know that thinking about loose and tight and loose versus tight is definitely like sort of the language of PLCs, professional learning communities. And I really like that. It seems like you're able to kind of structure your classroom so that you have kind of your cake and you can eat it too. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would, because I'm living it. But on the other hand, day 2 of kindergarten, I had clay, paint, printmaking, architecture, and mixed media all out at the same time. And it was no big deal. It really, if you create those structures and routines from moment one, and then always have those same structures and routines, it does just get a really great flow.
Oh, that's awesome. I know people listening out there are probably not going to believe you or believe us, but I want to put a plug in for some of your videos, and we'll have a link in the end of the podcast. But I believe if our listeners just did a Google search for Miss Russ art tutorials, is that what would get to some of your kind of instructions on how you do that?
Yeah, then they would be able to click into my channel. Because it's a brand new channel, it's some of my individual videos show up first. But if they scroll down a teeny bit, they can get access to the channel, or they can click into a video, and then they can go from there into the actual channel, just like my students do. Johanna,
one of the things I've really liked about you for the last few years that I've known you is you're kind of like my go-to expert for flipped instruction. And I want to ask you a little bit about that as well, but I want to stick with tab and thinking about how teachers develop curriculum a little bit more, are you ever worried, when we think about other schools across the district and, having a guaranteed and viable curriculum, that as a tab teacher, do you ever worry that you haven't covered everything or that you've missed something? I mean, how do you kind of worry about questions like that?
The curriculum that I teach is the exact same curriculum as all my other peers at the different elementary schools. It's just my take on how I teach it is very different. And I had this realization when I was learning about the new National Core Art Standards, which is that I can't cover it all. And even if I could, the students won't remember it. Being a middle school, high school teacher, I had the benefit of knowing that the students that came to me had amazing art teachers. They had an excellent curriculum. And yet I found myself needing to reteach the basics, even with that exposure to those excellent supplies and art teachers. And so it freed me to realize that it wasn't what the students knew that I needed them to learn. It was teaching them to be confident artists that was the main takeaway for my students. And if I could send students to the next level, being confident artists that when they experience something new, don't become hesitant, but they know how to approach it so that they can be successful, asking themselves those artistic questions that us as artists, whenever we experience a new media, get to ask. I wanted them confident about being able to talk about art or communicate through imagery with art. And so by changing the focus to what I was building inside of the student versus can my students spit out the answer to what does blue plus red equal, would give them a better foundation. One last thing besides the fact, sorry to plug another book, but another book that freed me from this is called Inevitable by Kevin Kelly, I believe. And it's discussing what our technology will be like in about 20 years, or what we might perceive it to be like. And the truth of the matter is that knowing things is going to become less and less important as working with computers and getting knowledge from computers becomes even more and more accessible.
Okay, you got me thinking of so many different things. One of the things and maybe I just want you to kind of echo back my own feelings on this. It kind of sounds like what you're talking about with your take on curriculum is kind of like a mindset over skill sets. Would you say that that's kind of like what you've been doing with your new take on curriculum?
Yes. So here's what I have learned, and it's super scary making the jump. But when you switch to teaching the mindset of artists, they turn into artists that want to learn skills. This week alone, I have never taught my kindergartners what colors mix together to make another color. And yet I overheard a kindergartner saying to another one, how do I make orange? And the table lit up with conversation as they had self-discovered making orange just through, I didn't provide orange. They had to color mix to find it. And the joy that came from their face made me realize that because they discovered that learning on their own, I don't think they're going to forget it. I don't think I'm going to reteach that child in first grade how to make orange. I think they had a moment that caused a deep memory to be made. And when you switch to making those deep memories, the learning stays and it allows for greater skill retention.
This has me thinking. I actually kind of gave you a question that I actually kind of hate asking, which is the notion of like covering. Like if all the teachers do is cover material or cover content, it's such a like surface level, sort of, I covered it. It's like, well, did the students like actually like give a crap about like what they learned or what you taught, or did you just like kind of go over it and talk about it? So I'm having flashbacks to sitting in rooms with people, teachers from like K-12, and we're all curriculum mapping, and we all say, okay, when is the best time for our students to learn this skill set or this skill set? And everyone kind of like tries to plant their flag and say, well, I really want to be the one who teaches tertiary colors in 5th grade. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, you can say that you covered it or that you taught it at that grade, but like my experience for the last 10 years has been like, I have 8th grade students that don't remember what primary colors are. And I know for a fact that you guys covered it in 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th grade, but it's like not really sticking. So I kind of wonder if your new approach to curriculum is actually going to make the learning be meaningful to students.
Right. So in this book, Inevitable, that freed me, it talked about how they train or how they create artificial intelligence in computers. In artificial intelligence, one of the first things they did was the Atari games, the Pong, I believe it's called, where the ball goes back and forth. You would think that how they would teach the artificial intelligence to play Pong is to program it the rules of Pong. But instead, they don't teach it or program it anything about Pong. They teach it to learn. And then through weeks of play, the computer literally plays to learn the rules of Pong. And that's how it becomes unbeatable. The same is true for computers with chess. They cause it to go through play to learn. And that freed me to realize my students, my kindergartners are going to be entering the workforce in 20 years. I cannot possibly predict the world that they are going to enter in 20 years. But what I do know is the more their brain can do, the more flexible their brain is, the more control and power they are going to have in our new economy. And I think that that is something that us as art teachers need to harness and own, because very few teachers get to say that they teach the brain how to think, whereas I think our curriculum does let us do that quite easily.
So one of the things I kind of want to circle back to is, you're talking about curriculum, and I just want to make sure, it seems like you're kind of talking about two separate sorts of curriculums. It's kind of like there's big C curriculum, which is your national core art standards that every teacher really ought to be using. And then there's kind of like little C curriculum, which is kind of like how each individual teacher is doing it or how each district's doing it. And sometimes people, I think of that little C curriculum as, well, when do I do my Van Gogh lesson? And when do I do my lesson on birds? And when do I do this? I think you're taking it a little bit differently, which is like, what are those mindsets I want to teach? Do you think it's right? Or am I kind of looking at this the right way, that you kind of think of there being like a big C curriculum and a little C curriculum?
Yeah, I love that analogy. I would almost say there's three. You have the national core art standards. A lot of times your state or your district will then rewrite those or tweak those, and that becomes the language of your people that teach the same as you in your district or in your state or in your county. And then there's the teacher view of, well, how am I going to teach that? How am I going to have students experience that? Which is where I came to TAB in the first place, because if I wanted my students to really engage in those national core art standards, they had to be able to experience failure. They had to be able to take risks, and it had to be in a positive light. TAB allows that. It allows students to genuinely learn and improve from their mistakes. And that's how the art gets good. But it's very scary. I don't know if you experienced this, Andrew, but the first time I went into teaching for artistic behavior, that first project is a train wreck. I mean, it is an absolute train wreck, because it has to be in order for the next project to be significantly better. But it isn't until that third experience for students that they have been in charge of their learning that you become shocked and awestruck by what they are able to do.
We're talking about a lot about TAB, and I know that this is that's a big push and a big direction with, how art teachers teach, but, there are other ways to do it. But, I do think it is a spectrum, how you run your curriculum, and you're going to be flexible. I think all teachers are going to be flexible, and new students, new jobs, new schools, new districts, new expectations. You might slide or shoot forward on sort of this, kind of how you do it. So I know, you were kind of asking me if I felt like that first project was kind of a nightmare. And I know, 4 years ago, I would say I was just starting to flirt with kind of choice and TAB, and every year it got more and more and more. And, I recently switched school districts, and I got to say, like, I'm kind of playing it a little safer, and I'm really trying to kind of get the pulse of my students and like see when they're ready to kind of start thinking this. Cause otherwise I knew it really would be like a whole lost semester of a train wreck of trying to really implement this sort of, mindset over skill set things. Now, did you had the opposite experience? You just jumped right into it at the elementary level with TAB, or did you pull back a little bit?
I love your point about how different students need a different experience, even the teacher. When I consider how I have taught using TAB, even last year where I taught 4 or 3 different classes at once, each class had a different take. That drawing 1 class TAB experience had to be different from 8th grade art, which had to be different from art 1. And even at the elementary level, different age groups need a different experience. So the teacher really would need to dive in for themselves and decide what that needed to look like for them and their students to be the most successful.
I think if you just jump into TAB with students who, like you said, have gotten into the routine of having things kind of laid out for them, and, you follow this recipe, it's like you're speaking a whole foreign language when you come up with this project that's really, really open-ended. So I think to kind of ramp up to that and build up to that's really good. But, Johanna, I think we could probably talk TAB for like another 40, 50 minutes and everyone would be kind of zoning out on us. But I wanted to kind of look at maybe the last piece of the puzzle of how you run your curriculum, and what I think is so interesting about it is how you flipped your instruction and flipped your curriculum. Can you kind of tell me like when you started doing that, or what do you think are the biggest benefits for that in your classroom?
So I started teaching with video instruction, I think about 8 or 9 years ago. I didn't really keep track at the time. In fact, I didn't even know it was called flipping. I just needed a second me, and videotaping myself seemed to be the easiest way to get that. I mean, how many times do you repeat yourself as an art teacher? Once you have a video, you don't have to repeat yourself anymore. And it allowed me to really differentiate my teaching. That flipped instruction is what let me know that I could teach using TAB, because essentially my students have access to me when they are ready to learn a new skill through those video tutorials. It allows me to have one student learning 1-point perspective while another student is learning 5-point perspective within the same classroom. And there's something about choice. The student choosing that they want to press play and learn causes them to engage with the learning in just a deeper way than when you say, okay, settle down, I gotta do a demo.
I know people out there are probably listening and saying like, so you're going to let your kindergartners just like press play on whatever video they want. Does your flipped instruction look different at the middle school level than it does now currently at the elementary level? I'm assuming it has to.
So logistically it has to, because I went into a classroom that doesn't yet have the technology to support what I had at the 8-9 level. But yes, my kindergartners do not get to choose their video. So they come into my room, they get to choose their center using their stick. And then they sit down and watch a 3.5-minute video. Even if the actual video is, let's say, 6 minutes long, I always just break it into 3.5-minute chunks. And then that is where essentially they're getting their learning. Then I make a point that we always review the last 3 videos using a little song. So it's helping to recall some of those past lessons.
Oh, that's awesome. So, Johanna, we've really talked about a lot of things, and I just keep thinking that this is not your normal curriculum talk, which I kind of like. I think both of us are not in the camp of kind of like do this lesson on Monday and then 2 Mondays from now you're ready for this lesson and everyone's lockstep, in the same formation. So for people out there who are kind of curious about, planning curriculum, you have any parting words or what you think was your biggest aha moment when it came to big C or little C curriculum?
I treated my curriculum experience like an artist getting a brand new media. As artists, we're not scared when we're introduced to something new. We become curious. We want to play with it. We want to discover what it can and can't do. And allowing yourself that freedom, even while you continue teaching maybe the way you've always taught, will allow for big change, but in incremental steps. Freeing your brain is the first important step, I would say.
I like that a lot. I like, kind of playing with it. And that is the fearless approach that artists, that's what we do. So that's awesome. Johanna, thanks so much for coming on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Absolutely. I enjoyed sharing.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know I really did. It's not your typical curriculum talk, but Johanna isn't your typical elementary art teacher. What I love about her is she's a great mix of creativity and outside the box thinking, and she instills that in her students, more importantly. But she's able to do all of that because she's very logical and very organized. It's kind of a yin and yang sort of thing. If you haven't seen some of her YouTube videos, I totally recommend checking those out. Do yourself a favor. Do a quick Google search for Miss Russ Art Tutorials. I love how she pointed out that, there really are 2 curriculums, the official set of standards that we're given, and then the creative and individual way that we translate and perform those standards. However you approach your capital C curriculum is up to you, but be authentic to your teaching style and your teaching philosophy. But even more importantly, be in service to the needs of your students. I think you'll find that the more years that we teach and the more years we have in the game, our approach to curriculum is kind of like a pendulum. We're going to swing back and forth, and sometimes we'll be more open-ended, and then sometimes we'll be more structured and tight. But it's all in service to what our students need to learn. Always remember that we teach students first and that our content really should be secondary to that. If we ever lose sight of this and we fall head over heels in love with our awesome Little C curriculum, we could very well lose our ability to reach our students' hearts and minds. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. Okay, for all you AOE fans out there, we have got a special discount code for AOE's Art Ed Now conference on February 18th. Art Ed Radio listeners can enter Listeners Save 20, that's all one word, Listeners Save 20, at checkout for 20% off registration. That will bring your $125 conference price down to just $100, which is totally awesome. As always, new episodes of Art Ed Radio will be released every Tuesday, and additional content can be found under the podcast tab on theartofed.com. All right, thanks for listening.